Okay, so we have kind of introduced the notion of the categorical imperative, but even in Kant's own words, we have not yet advanced so far as to prove that there really is such an imperative, that there is a practical law which commands absolutely of itself and without any other impulses, and that the following of this law is duty. So the question therefore arises whether it's a practically necessary law, that is, a law that imposes some obligation for all rational beings, that they should always judge their actions by maxims which they can will to be universal laws, whether it's practically necessary to follow the categorical imperative. If this is the case, if we do have to follow it, or if we should follow it, then there has to be a synthetic a priori connection between the concept of the will of a rational being and the categorical imperative. So, much like an attorney in a courtroom has to connect all the dots, we're holding Kant to a similar standard. So how is he going to connect this categorical imperative to the will of a rational being? Like with Kant, this is not an easy process. It actually takes him quite a bit of space to be able to do this. So I'll try to summarize it as best I can. So Kant argues that that which serves the will as the objective ground of its self-determination is its end. And if there is an end which is assigned by reason alone, and not by desire, but by reason alone, it will be valid for all rational beings and will thus serve as the ground for a categorical imperative binding the wills of all rational beings. So if we can find something, to put it quite simply, that is good for one based on our nature as rational beings, then it should logically follow that it will be good for all. But this end can't be a relative end that's related to our impulses or desires. It has to be an end in itself, something that we desire only because of some value that it holds. So, and he wrote, assuming that there is something the existence of which has in itself absolute value, something which, as an end in itself, could be the ground of determinate laws, then in it, and in it alone, would lie the ground of a possible categorical imperative, that is, of a practical law. So what is it? Is there such an end? Well, Kant puts forward that humans, indeed any rational being, is an end in itself. So the rational being is an end in itself. The concept of a rational being as an end in itself can therefore serve as the ground for a supreme practical principle or law. And to quote Kant, the ground of this principle is, rational nature exists as an end in itself. The practical imperative will thus be as follows. So act as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of any other, always at the same time as an end and never merely as a means. Now, key phrases in that statement are at the same time and merely. So we can't help making use of other people as means. The example in the text was a mechanic. You go to a mechanic to fix your car. Go to a hairdresser to get a haircut. Go to a restaurant to have someone cook your food. People have to fulfill those functions, and in serving those functions, they are a means to your ends, your haircut, your repaired car, your cooked meal. The difference for Kant is that we don't treat them merely as ends, so we don't objectify them, use them as tools, in essence, to get what we want, that we have respect for them still as human beings because they are an end in themselves. And for Kant, every human being has equal intrinsic value. That's a key point to remember. And he applies this, actually this categorical imperative kind of flows in and out of a lot of his works. But he applies this formulation to some of the examples that we've talked about early on. So a person who commits suicide, who destroys himself, kills himself, to escape painful circumstances, uses himself because he is a person as a mere means to a relative end, namely the maintenance of tolerable conditions up to the end of life. The man who makes a promise to obtain a benefit, when he has no intention of fulfilling that promise, or when he knows that he will never be in a position to be able to fulfill it, uses the man to whom he makes the promise as a mere means to a relative end. So this is where the moral dilemma in those examples comes into play. And I sincerely hope that this has kind of cleared up some of the Kantian readings in our text. But as I said, Kant is a very convoluted and difficult philosopher, and you really have to read his whole body of work to have a complete understanding. So I don't expect you to know everything in the couple of pages that you were given, but at least understand what a categorical imperative is and what he means when he says that we should never treat people as a means, that we need to respect them as ends in themselves.